Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local Podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and we are here doing an exploration of my podquest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev but never dared to ask. And I'm joined by Melissa. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, please.
Hi, Oscar. Thanks for inviting me, and hi to everyone. So, I'm originally from South Africa. My career has been what I like to call higgledy-piggledy. It's been a bit of a jigsaw puzzle piece, which is why I ended up getting the name Agile Owl. So, I'm a founder of the Agile Owl, which is still in development, still playing around with the ideas of what I want the business to be built into. But essentially, currently at the moment, I'm working for a company called New Legal, which helps businesses in tech, marketing, disruptive tech, IT, those type of industries to help them with all of their legal needs like contract law, IP, HR, those sort of things. And then I'm also now partnered up with Stuart and Tom, who is with GDL, and we're creating a company called NextPlay Consulting, which is a video consulting company. So I'm heading up the legal department of NextPlay. So I've got thousands of eggs in the basket right now, or as my father...
You're coming at games from this kind of legal, historic kind of background and applying that kind of principle to it, which I think's actually something we don't talk enough about, the legal side of games.
No, I mean, it's very, like, it's a disjointed industry. It's as you say, it's not spoken enough. No one actually knows that legal is a very pivotal part of the gaming industry, and it's often neglected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to talk about other things, but I mean, I'll get this out off my kind of chest now while I think about it. So I think you really hit on how we often forget about it. For example, one of the things that often happens in live ops is people forget to tell the legal team that they need something signed off before they can put it live. And I'm being a bit unfair, but imagine that you're building a competition. You're doing all the tech for it. You're doing all the setup. You're doing the config. You're doing the writing of the terms. The rules and all that. And somebody remembers they have to check that all with the legal team, especially with the 2006 Gambling Act, which has very specific rules about prizes. And again, I mean, how often do you end up with situations where you're called in at the last minute going, oh, I didn't think about this?
It's actually, I'm an afterthought. It happens more regular than you'd think.
Well, than you'd hope, at least.
Well, yeah, then I'd hope. I've had so many, it's like all these different situations. I've had co-founders come to me to say, oh, we've built a game, but we've signed up with a publisher. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Who owns the IP? Is it you or is it the publisher? Who has exclusivity? What kind of contract? Have you signed the contract? Like,
what are termination clauses?
Do you have an exit plan? Or even that, like gambling, do you have loot boxes in your games? For example, that's a big one.
Well, so... we can go to town on loot boxes another podcast, because I have various views on loot boxes. No, mostly because I actually believe that loot boxes are not gambling, but that's a whole conversation about payout. Can you pay it out? Can you resell the account? Lots of messy stuff in there.
Yeah,
we will have.
It's a loaded one.
That's for episode 2. We'll do together. We'll have to plan that one out. For this episode, what I would like to do is explore your journey. So, you're a legal person, you've done that kind of training, but you've come from South Africa and you've come over here. What does that journey look like? I mean, in terms of what does the industry in South Africa currently look like, or at least at the time you were there? And what are the differences? So, there's a lot of questions in there. Tell us a bit where you started, why you wanted to do games, and what it was like in South Africa when you started that process.
Well, this is going back to potentially in the early 2000s, I
Yeah.
always wanted to get into the game industry, like every other kid, always wanting to, be a programmer, an artist, or something in the video game industry. But South Africa is light years behind the rest of the world. So you kind of have to think of it as if we're in the dark ages compared to where the UK is currently.
Well, I mean, just to reinforce that, as I understand it, because I talked a bit to people like Carrie First, an African-based publisher, the economy process, the buying process, particularly in mobile, is around credit. It's like cards. Basically, you buy a card with an amount on it to do a transaction. I don't know if that's still the same for PC. I think you still use Steam in South Africa. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a digital economy.
Yeah.
So financially, like our fintech is pretty good. I mean,
Okay.
we have the Rand Merchant
But
Bank,
lots
which
of Africa territories don't have a lot of that infrastructure in the same way, or they operate slightly differently, is my point.
yeah, they say that South Africa is the one of I think it's probably next to Kenya is the biggest economy within the African continent. So a lot of business happens in South Africa, but politically we're not doing so well at the moment. So there's not a lot of investments. A lot of companies are being pulled out. The whole political economy at the moment is very unstable, like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So there isn't a lot of investment in the video game
fine.
industry.
You've got a former native at the heart of the let's not go to America. Yeah, let's ignore that right now. Let's not talk about Elon.
Yeah, let's not go there. Or Vance. I've got my words about Vance.
No.
But yeah, so in the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to actually get into the video game industry.
Yeah.
The only things that you could do, like studying wise, I had a good background, good education, private education, thanks to my dad. I went to a very I don't like the school that I actually went to. None of my sisters, all of us, we went to that school. None of us actually enjoyed it because they were very sexist. Surprisingly, they taught us a lot about subjects on how to be a good housewife. So,
wow.
How to drink tea the proper etiquette way with your little pinky finger out. Kind of like how Stu always drinks his tea.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, so we learned all about that etiquette in that school. And the one thing, I had art classes there, and I think I was like, not to toot my own horn, but I think I was the best artist in my whole grade.
Lovely.
Everyone used to say so. So I know I was a good artist, but the thing is, I was very bad at getting good grades. Coming from I'm very ADHD, as you probably have heard. I jump around, bounce around a lot. So in school I was on
company.
So I was on Ritalin. My concentration was really bad. The only thing that actually kept me in focus was having horses and working with horses. That helped me to have a bit of stability in life. But yeah, so all of my artwork is all about horses. I've always loved horse riding games since I was a kid, and I wanted to work for Ubisoft or one of the big huge companies that work on Bethesda for Skyrim, or Fable as well. I had those dreams when I was a kid. When I told the school I wanted to get into the gaming industry, the school psychologist was like, well, Melissa, you'd probably only just end up marrying a very rich man who owns a stud farm and just riding horses for the rest of your life. And I had 2 psychologists telling me that.
Wow.
And to my dad as well. My dad and I were like, sorry?
Wow. Because that's all you're good for. Women know your place.
Yeah, and that's coming from a school which is all about women empowerment. And it's just, it was so if anyone ever tells me you can't do something, I'm that personality to be like, oh, okay, well, if you say I can't do it, I'll show you that I can do it.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, well, screw you, the school that I
honestly,
went to.
This sounds like the kind of stuff that, the generation before me had to experience in the UK. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
my sister-in-law, who's slightly older, um, she had parallel being told that she couldn't go to university; she had to go to secretarial college,
Ooh. Ooh, yeah,
which I think is the
my
equivalent.
parents
I mean,
also.
it to
Yeah.
me that's an equivalent. I know we're talking about probably the '60s. I'm guessing at the time. Maybe a bit later than that, but '60s, '70s. So I think obviously Western culture has evolved from there. Thank goodness. Is that what triggered your desire to come to the UK?
No.
All right.
um, so not even, but my desire was always to go overseas in some
Yeah.
capacity or other, but coming to the UK was something that we only touched on much later, like years
Yeah.
later. I always thought that I would be in South Africa and the country would work. A lot of us, South Africans, we always thought things will get better,
Yeah.
it will work out. But, from 2008, things started going in a very steep decline ever
You're
since we
right.
had President Zuma, who was very corrupt. He already had
Mm.
about 5 lawsuits against him for corruption, bribery, and criminal charges, and he was still made president, which won't get
Yeah.
into the politics of that because that's probably a podcast for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my education led me towards having a situation where my parents and I had to sit down and be like, okay, well, where do I go from here?
Hmm.
So I loved animals, try to go the vet school route, but I've got such a big heart for animals. I literally could not last an hour just job shadowing. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is not for me. And then I was like,
No, I
okay,
mean,
work for
veterinary skills seem to be kind of they like to punish anyone who I think I imagine for the same for being medical generally,
mm,
the actions you do are almost like a punishment for the things that you care about. I know I couldn't do it. At least that's me. That's my take on it. I mean, I'm sure that, for example, a friend of mine's an A&E nurse. She absolutely loves it. And I know there are lots of people out there who love being vets, but I
yeah.
can't imagine the emotional journey that would take.
Yeah, I think for me, it would probably destroy my mental health, to be honest. I mean, my best friend's younger sister, um, funny enough, I I think I was partly inspired her to get into vet school from a very young age. We always used to play games together after school and after horse riding. And there was one game that I had with me that I gave to my best friend, and I'm like, here, you can try this out. But it ended up being I gave it. She didn't want to play it, and I gave the game to her little sister.
Mm.
And it was I think that the title was My Vet Practice,
Oh,
something
okay.
like that, or My Vet Practice in the Country. I can't quite remember the title of the game, but it was all about having your own vet practice, treating little cute animals and horses. And she apparently used to play this game on repeat, like throughout her whole entire childhood. And that inspired her to, become a vet, amongst other factors as
But
well.
that shows that, I mean, again, this just reinforces the cultural significance, even in a circumstance in a country with the questions and the issues that are going on in the background, the obviously educational questions as well. But essentially, games still formed a key part
Mm.
of ways of forming your decisions and also the decisions of other people, which they do everywhere. I mean, it shows the universality of games, doesn't
Yeah, and I saw the power of how video games can actually be quite like educational, because a lot of the games that I played with the horses were very educational and
it? Mm.
inspired a lot of girls to actually get more involved in the video game industry. And it inspired a lot of them to become vets or horse vets or work in agriculture or in some form of capacity with horses. But I've seen them also become teachers and coaches, and
Yes.
it inspired them to also teach other kids or to write books as well. Like,
Mm.
there are so many avenues of video games that has the potential to shape a person.
Yeah.
And in South Africa, it's something that not a lot of people talk about, how video games actually helps and how it builds or shapes a person, or how it can actually be good and be educative. But it is a very small industry. I think I saw, I can't remember what company did these data or statistics, but we found that there's only 14 video game studios in the whole of South Africa.
Yeah.
And I mean, the UK, I think the whole of the UK can fit in South Africa like two or three times. So you can imagine
Something like
how
that,
many
yeah.
gaming studios we have in this country
Yeah.
versus South Africa. And you're like, what?
Well, the African Game Summit, which I think takes place in South Africa, if I remember correctly, is actually also relatively new as well. Relatively, I've actually never managed to make it. One of these days I'll do. So let's go back. So you've got through your education, which are obviously the issues that you're dealing with. You're contemplating what to do next. Why law? Why games?
So I couldn't get into video games like I wanted.
Yeah.
I didn't have maths or science, so I couldn't study. The only degree that they had possible was computer science.
Yes.
And that I wanted to do for like programming and find a route that way. But my aunt, she was already a programmer for Java. She worked for some company in Europe. I'm not sure at the time, and she kind of was trying to persuade my mom, I should go that programming route. But my mom insisted that video games you couldn't make a lot of money in, and I kind of feel like she's semi-right.
She's semi-right, yeah.
She's semi-right.
That's very true. I've managed to make a living, but I haven't become massively wealthy. I know some people do.
Yeah.
But,
some people just hit the jackpot or the
Yeah.
lucky break, and then they just become very rich, like the guys for...
But the important thing is we're not doing it necessarily. I mean, I think most of us, particularly in this sort of game dev local kind of scene, we make games because we love games. We work with game scenes because we love games. We love what they can do, into the intellectual job of that. So, but typically, when people say I didn't have the grades for something, they would normally be saying I didn't have the grades to get into law, rather than didn't have the grades to get into coding.
Well, I think how I actually got into law school, because I got into the accelerated program, which begs the question, I didn't have maths or science, so how the heck did I get into an accelerated program?
Yeah.
And I think that all goes into, I remember going to a psychologist to do kind of an intense psychometric test, because at that point I was like, well, if I can't go into the video game industry and I can't do BA art like I want to, what else do I do with the rest of my life? I was very confused. And a lot of my cousins, my uncles and aunts, a lot of them are lawyers. So it kind of goes back to, your parents have an expectation, either lawyer, accountant, or,
or doctor.
or doctor. And in my case, the doctor bit was out. The accountant, clearly I'm not good with numbers because I flunked maths and science. So the only option that we had was, okay, look at law school. And my dad was like, okay, well, law school is a pretty good, career to have. His idea was it would be very stable. You'd have a secure job, and you'd grow and make a crap ton of money in order for me to pay for the horses. So I was like, okay. Went to the psychometric test, and it turned out that the psychometric test said that I would make a very good lawyer. I don't know if it was skewed to just say that I would be a good lawyer. I do argue a lot, so I don't know.
I have many views on psychometric tests, depending on, because quite a lot of them are based on sort of Jungian models, which isn't scientifically based. Some of them are use a mechanism called OCEAN, which is the evidence-based personality type test. But obviously, psychometrics is more than just the personality stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Lots of fun things like that. So you get there, you're doing now. Presumably, you're doing your legal study in South Africa.
Yeah. So I got into an accelerated program called LLB Honors. Which is essentially 4 years. So usually how it works in South Africa, which I think is different than the UK with the becoming a lawyer here, we have to study BA law or BCom law for about 3 years, and then you apply for your honors, which is about a 2-year program. But you can get into an accelerated program of 4 years, which is just everything within 5 years squashed all together.
Yeah.
And you get one elective, and the one elective I chose was French, because I love languages. And in first year, French was the only subject that I was getting 90s. Everything else I was bombing out really badly. And the only way to actually get me through law school is my dad had to incentivize me. So for every
your dad gamified your legal course.
Pretty much, yes. He had a loot box waiting for me at the end of my degree of just every distinction. I would get a monetary value for that distinction. So you can bet your dollar that I was going to aim to make my dad bankrupt by the end of the degree, if that was the case. But he did actually, was truthful on it, to his word, poor man. Because I did end up finishing my law degree with a distinction.
Yeah.
And during that time, it did open my eyes to a lot of the capabilities, or just, how the world works. It's made me smarter, it made me braver, it made me intelligent in how to start a business. And I guess it created the foundation stones that I would need if I wanted to start my own business, or my own journey.
Yeah, and these are kind of they're not really soft skills. Because soft skills are more about people and direct interactions. These are the ability to be able to there's something, not the hard skill I would consider to be like a coding is a hard skill. People engagement, socially connecting, soft skill. Somewhere in between is this ability to sort of focus and frame momentum. And I think building a company is about understanding strategy, understanding what you're trying to deliver, why you're trying to deliver it. And I think it sounds like from what you're describing, the framing of the kind of legal education you've had also provided you with the ability to be able to frame directed action as well. So I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah,
so
correct.
you've gone through your legal side. You're now in South Africa. How do you get the connection back to gaming?
So in my final year, actually I wrote a dissertation, and you'd think that I'd write something on the video game industry, but at that time I was still quite clouded in how to actually break into the gaming industry. It was always at the back of my mind of being like, okay, finish my law degree, it's almost over, but how the heck do I get into law? And I had the huge opportunity to work with Professor Christoph Haynes. And at the time, he was the UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Life. And he did a lot of papers for the UN on robotics, drone technology, AI, those sort of things within the military industry, because we were at that time already starting to look at the capabilities of, or just the capabilities of having more like robotics in the military industry. And he was specifically looking at how realistic Terminator would actually be. He was literally writing papers on the Terminator. And I worked with him to write my dissertation on drone technology. And from that, it pivoted my career. From the final year of my law school, it pivoted my career as the drone lawyer, which is what everyone has known, what everyone apparently calls me in South Africa is, if you want to speak to someone about drones, go to the drone lawyer. And
fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know I had that nickname, but I'm just rolling with it now, because a couple of law firms, they used to come to me to ask me for advice, and I'd be like, why are you coming to me? I'm only a first or second year, just straight out of law school.
It's such a new area. That's the trouble, isn't it?
It was a new area, and in South Africa, it's still pretty new area. But yeah, from working in that industry, during my articles, because after you finish law school, you have to do your 2 years kind of your article clerkship that they have here. But before you qualify, you do your 2 years servitude, because you're essentially a skivvy/slave,
Yeah,
and
tea
it's
maker.
really, really awful. It's a
Yeah.
horrible experience, but you learn a lot if you find the right place to go to, and you're with the right people. I was lucky, very lucky, that I found a law firm that was that had people in the technology industry, and that allowed me to explore video games and fintech and disruptive tech, and explore all those different areas, and blockchain technology, because it was a relatively new niched area in South Africa for some
Or
reason.
it's,
And
I would argue it still is new in terms of it's not new, but it's such an evolving space. I've become very negative to blockchain technology, mostly because even though I worked on one of the earliest games, in fact I think Reality Clash, a guy called Tony Pierce, Reality Games, created a game called Reality Clash, which I did the design work for.
yeah.
It was the first game that Apple approved. So first game with blockchain that Apple formally approved. So, but you'd think that I'd have done lots of blockchain stuff, but almost everybody who came afterwards were basically con men.
Yeah, yeah. Blockchain has not got
Yeah,
exactly a very good reputation.
no,
I mean,
exactly.
it's heavily regulated in South Africa, and
Yeah,
usually, with how the government works is if they don't understand something, they try to heavily regulate against it from working out, which is kind of why I stopped with the drone technology, because
yeah,
I didn't really see growth in that area. As I was part of an organization called the this is long-winded, the Commercial Unmanned Aviation Association of South Africa, KUASA. And
Kawasa. Sounds like
KUASA.
a
Yeah.
wow. Okay, that's a great. That sounds like it ought to mean something.
Yeah.
Yeah, name of
So
a tribal god or something. Yeah, an
I mean,
eagle god.
I'm sure they would
Yeah,
love to be seen as an eagle god,
yeah,
considering
yeah,
the crap that we went through in that organization.
yeah.
But yeah, I won't get into the specific of that because I don't want to get myself into trouble.
No, no.
But I did leave the industry just purely because of the bribery and corruption that was involved
Yeah,
in it. I did help draft the regulations for commercial drone use in South Africa, but the government was constantly putting roadblocks every step we went. So
yeah,
it never got anywhere. And most of the companies that I tried to help through this organization, where we try to get all of the permits and the paperwork and everything else in order to be legal, they couldn't get, because the government would create something called, we
yeah,
call it tea time rules. And they spent millions of rands trying to get these permits, and the company goes bankrupt. And there's like thousands of different technology advancements that South Africa could use in the agricultural industry, especially with the cash in transit industry as well. We have a lot of criminals going after our cash and transit vehicles, and drones would have actually
yeah.
helped to give that security.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. But the thing that's striking me is that what this is giving you is you've gone through the kind of South African kind of education system, the legal training, you've been exposed to multiple technology-based industries, which
yeah,
I think gives it a kind of a unique view across different applications of legislation and regulation in all kinds of different emerging spaces. And so you've come out of that. What point do you come over to the UK? Do you get into games first, as in do you
yeah.
find a games job first, or do you come to the UK first?
I got into the gaming industry first. So
Okay.
um, because of the climate of South Africans, the political climate, it's really hard finding work or getting a job. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether it's hospitality, retail, legal, business, accounting, anything really. It's just it's hard to actually get a job. Most people just start their own businesses. But even then, the government will always go against you with high tax thresholds and all these policies that they have in place. So
Sure.
when I finally qualified as an attorney, I thought, yes, it'll be so easy to find a job afterwards. I couldn't stick with the law firm that I was doing my articles with, because they have a kind of like a triage system where you work under a partner, and if that partner, which the partners I was working under, they all left, so that means that I couldn't carry on.
Yeah,
I didn't have a
I
team.
get it. So what was the gaming company, and how did you get into that?
So for a while, I think I worked for my dad's company for a year till I think it was in 2019, and during that time, I had like a long, hard discussion with my dad, because he wanted me to carry on with law. He wanted me to just stick with the plan, even though I was struggling to find work. No one was hiring me, despite the fact that I had all of these accomplishments behind me. Um, and I just wanted to be in the video game industry. Like, it was painful, because I went through law school, I went through doing my articles, I did everything my dad and my mom wanted me to do, and I'm like, please, for the love
With
of
the
God, let me
incentives
go.
too.
Yeah, with incentives
There's a
as
lot of
well, which
guilt.
was
A lot of
great.
guilt involved in that, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used it to buy my horse's saddles, so that kind of
Fair enough.
but yeah, like, I didn't actually invest that money when I should have. I should have actually invested that money to building something, like building my own gaming studio or something like that.
Yeah.
But hindsight, right? But yeah, I had a discussion with my dad. He paid a part-time course for me, like a night course, to study game design and development.
Great. So you're
And
literally going and studying game design development for yourself at this point. Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, I gotta admit, I'm luckier than most kids I know. South Africa and UK, Scotland, like everywhere in the world, like having a parent that would support me to pay for my education, and pay for like courses that I take and degrees and things like that. So I'm incredibly lucky, and I really do appreciate my dad's support. So he's always, helped to push me into the video game industry, but he's always supported me, like, to fall back.
Yeah.
So if that doesn't work, then I'm able to fall back. But
I mean, as somebody who I came from a relatively privileged kind of context, very middle class, but for me, I tried to get my first job in the games industry in '98. No, '88. Sorry, '88. It wasn't really a job. I was pitching a game in '88. Is it '88 or '87? '87. '87. I was 18 at the time, so it was '87. Pitched a game. We were told, great idea, come back when you've made it.
ooh,
But
yeah, that's what you should do.
well, but the trouble is, I didn't have any financial support beyond. I mean, my parents were okay, but they didn't have the disposable income for me to then go and do something like that. So I had to go to college. I didn't get a grant. I had to do a lot of kind of like, I had to work my way through college. Like I said, not complaining. I had a better position than most people, but it took me 10 years to get to the point where I could actually pitch myself in a games job.
Yeah.
And I did that as a marketeer, having trained in marketing, which then allowed me to get a job. So I've been in this kind of weird situation where, whilst on paper I have this kind of privileged background, and I do, obviously, compared to a lot of people, I never had enough. I never had a pool of cash. I never had that kind of like that scope to just take the jump, because I didn't know where I was going to get, unless I had an income. I literally didn't know where I'd eat, or where I'd sleep. I had to pay my rent somehow, so I was constantly thinking about it. So I mean, I think this is difficult. So it shows a broad range of people, and I'm just an example. We know loads of people have got similar, even more complicated historical backgrounds. But it's that passion to make games, and finding the way that you can make games. And it sounds like your dad gave you the opportunity, to space to be able to go find that course, to be able to start making. So you're starting to make your own games at this point, building a portfolio, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I mean, the course that I did, it was a bit of a fly-by-night academy, to say the least. The guys who were teaching us, and this is ironic because 2 years after I completed that course, I actually worked with these same guys again in
Okay.
the gaming studio I worked at. But when I was studying, being taught by these guys, they were kind of also generalists. So they knew, animation and art, and they knew they knew a bit of programming and just the very basics. And essentially, they just gave us tutorials, and they were like, "Okay, cool, you have to make a game within these parameters. This is kind of the theme, the genre. Like, you have to build all of this. These are all the basics that you need to know. This is how you create a game dev document. These are all the tools that you use. Have fun, go at it. If you get if you're stuck anyway, just let us know." And me having zero programming knowledge, no background whatsoever, this was kind of like me either sinking or swimming situation. So by the end of the year, we had to have about 5 games in a portfolio. So they kind of forced us to sort of learn ourselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, despite the fact that my dad paid, I don't know how much he paid for this course, it must have been hella expensive. And then they don't even teach you. They kind of be like, "Okay, cool, here you go, here's the tools." I could have just learned all the stuff on YouTube.
Literally, you could have done that on YouTube.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. And by the end of it, we got to showcase, a few of us got to showcase our games at Rage, which is one of the biggest gaming expos that we have in South Africa, which is actually what, like, going there almost every single year as a kid with my dad, that always inspired me. I wanted to get into the gaming industry. Even meeting Oscar, I think Oliver Bowden, the writer for Assassin's Creed, I met him there as well, and that was mind blowing for me as a kid. Like, even the creators for Final Fantasy as well, like, just inspirational stuff. Rage really, was the biggest gaming expo we had in South Africa, brought a lot of investments from a video game background into the country. So we showcased, I think it was at the end of 2019 in September, we showcased our video games, and I had 5 video games that I created. One of them was aimed at, deforestation that was currently happening in the Amazon forest with the fires and, agriculture. So I created a game around that, which I showcased quite heavily at Rage. And through that showcase of the games, I managed to get the attention of a company called 24-Bit Games, which is one of the bigger companies in South Africa. They're essentially, their business is third party. So if you are a studio, you've already built a game, but you either want to have the code cleaned up, you come to 24-Bit Games, no matter where you are in the world, really. If you also want to port your game from PC or VR to just Nintendo, or from Nintendo to all the other consoles, or whatever you want to do, you go to 24-Bit Games, and they do all of the groundwork to actually, be able to port the games and make sure that everything works smoothly, especially the UI UX. So that was my first break into the video games industry, and I think that was literally about, like, it took me about 7 or 8 years to actually get into the gaming industry. Possibly longer, because I've always wanted to be in it.
So, I mean, like I say, it took me 10 years, took you 7 years. So, but the point is that at the heart of it, what we're saying is that there are, for those people out there who are looking at what they're trying to do, the journey that you go through to get that professional role has profound implications on what your perspectives are, has a profound implications on what you can draw on as inspiration, what you can draw on in terms of understanding about ways to leverage and the implications of choices you make. So, I mean, I'm not sure particularly in your case, but I mean, I imagine that you choosing something around environmental issues means you're expressing something personal, but at the same time that's profoundly kind of human, and that's impacting the world around you, and being able to have a position on that. But in that process, I'm assuming that you've been able to draw on the fact that you know some of the kind of regulatory issues, you know some of the cultural issues that are applying into your own space, and you're going to be bringing that with you in that design as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the games that I've created, I mean, as you say, it actually has truth in it. All the games that I've ever created has something about society, about social change, or
Yeah.
something to help the world in some way. I think there's a specific social change, or diversity, inclusion, societal change. I can't remember the exact term or phrase of it, but
Yeah.
those were all the games that I kind of hope to create, and I still want to create. All the games that I will, for the foreseeable future, will be creating games on animal conservation, wildlife protection, and because
Well, I
I've
think you
kept very close to my
mentioned
heart.
I think one of the things you looked at was to do with child trafficking. Is that right? And
Oh
gender-based
yeah,
violence.
yeah. That was actually quite cool. So yeah, that was a board game that one of my friends, my colleagues, actually, I worked with him for a little bit after 24-bit games. We tried to build a video game together. He comes from a marketing background.
Yeah.
And actually, I would love to get him on a podcast as well, because his background is also quite interesting. He also started up from the marketing point, much like you, to try get
Yeah.
into the video game industry. Now he's actually working as a business developer also in London, for some I don't know which video game company it is. When he had this marketing company in South Africa, he first got this client, and this contract has been in negotiation for like 3 years. He only contacted me, I think it was last year or the year before. It was 2023, just as I immigrated. He got in touch and said, this client is looking for a game designer and a producer to help her build a game, and it's a board game. So can you work with me on this? And that was kind of the footing that I kind of needed at that point when I had first immigrated to the UK, to give me something to do, because at the time I was actually struggling to find work, because as we know, 2023, the industry completely imploded.
Yes. What a great time to choose to immigrate to the UK.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, after my husband and I are constantly thinking, crap, if only we had waited like a year
Yeah.
or maybe 5 years, we probably would have been in a better state to move across. I mean, we have World War III on the loom, and we're like,
Yay.
it's a grand time to immigrate.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this board game that we created, I built up a team, and the issue that we had was she wanted to build a board game that would be educational for the youth on gender-based violence. And
Yeah.
this is where my legal background actually helped and came into it a lot, because we had to step very carefully, because she wanted to have the board game tested out by children in underprivileged schools, and where there's a lot of gender-based violence
Yeah.
cases going on. So the idea of this game was social impact. That's it. Social impact of change.
Social impact. Yeah.
So she wanted this game to educate children that are either the instigators of violence or the victims of violence. Those who are the instigators to understand their punishment if they're caught, and those who are the victims to understand you're not alone. There are people you can
The
speak to.
recourse that they have as well. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's also, for kids who watch it happen at home, because they often see their parents inflicting, this sort of violence. And it's a huge issue in South Africa, as it is worldwide, but you see it a lot in South Africa, and the worst time of the year is usually around Christmas. So she essentially was building a board game that was going to somehow help these kids in either not doing anything violent, or acting on it, and trying to prevent it from happening, or even just speaking out. So the issue here was we had to get specialists to advise us on how to proceed with this, especially from the government. We need special permissions, because now we are dealing with a psychological space that required specialists to get involved, and that meant that we had to bring psychologists and psychiatrists, caseworkers, or social caseworkers.
Massive undertaking at this point,
huge undertaking. And I was based here, like I was living in Scotland at the time, and she's in South Africa, and I was thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna have to try find a go-between, a go-fit, like in betweener. And the team that I built up, I found graphic design artists in Cape Town who do a lot of marketing work for change, work with a lot of these charity companies and everything to do with like social impact and change and things like that. So they knew the space quite well, and they knew a lot about localization, which really helped, because I think that's something that a lot of video game studios founders, they seem to neglect that when they design in a game. They don't think of localization.
Well, particularly because the languages in South Africa aren't the same main languages that we would usually translate to. We're going to translate to eFigs, Japanese, Korean, 2 forms of Chinese. That's probably where we'd stop.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you say, is it 13 you said?
13. Yeah, I think it's 12, 13 officially recognized languages in our constitution. So we decided we'd stick with English, though, because to localize the game would mean it would be too expensive, would be costly, especially for a charity. And the other issue that I had when I was building up a team, I also found a team of game designers who were professors at the University of Witwatersrand. And they were...
I'm glad you said that, not me.
I still can't even say that I'm born in the country. So they teach game design and media for the degree that Wits currently has for game design. Only took them 20 years to actually develop a degree for people in the gaming industry. But they teach it, and then I brought that whole team together, and we worked together to try and build up this board game. But we were on a set timeline of about 16 weeks, and we were set budgets to about 178,000 rand split between all of us.
Which is not a lot.
Yeah. So I sacrificed a big chunk from my side, because I thought how I budgeted it was the game designers would be doing a big chunk of the work, as well as the graphic designers, and I'd just be sitting there just telling everyone what to do, essentially. And I just
That's kind of what a producer does.
Yeah. So there's I didn't feel that I needed a bigger cut than everyone else, so I budgeted it sort of that way, and I had to sit with the team and say, look, we don't have a big budget, this is kind of how we will split the fees.
It's always difficult trying to do that, particularly because people often undervalue the role of that producer, and it's often as involved as anybody else. But I think what you're kind of describing for me is that one of the common traits I see in territories where they have not yet fully developed the mature gaming sector is that you're lacking people with a long-term experience. You're relying on a smaller number of people, if you're trying to find people with that experience, to be able to end up delivering a final product. It's an incredibly tight thing, but I like the fact that you were using people who were in the sector, but not necessarily games people producing the art assets. In some ways, I think in that particular context, people who understand the communication process involved in a difficult subject like this are probably more relevant than getting a games person to try to learn those. I mean, I worked with a team in Kenya for a location-based game. It didn't work out because it was launched the day of lockdown, which was not great. Poor guys. But it was a really lovely idea, all about showing the life of great apes, in particular orangutans in Borneo. Anyway, and a bunch of things. But the point was that even though they were trying to build up the talent and skills in the local territory, it was a massive challenge where there isn't already an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so we're coming to a close, but I mean, I want to. You've talked about a long journey, getting yourself as somebody who has always had a passion for video games, going through the legal framework, finding ways to teach yourself game making. You've managed to move over to the UK at possibly the hardest time imaginable in my 30-year-ish. I've been doing games since '98, but I was doing other things similar before that. So, it's probably the hardest time in the game industry I've ever seen. Um, what was it worth it? Is it worth coming? Did you get the benefit for coming over? But B, more importantly, what would you say to other people about choosing to move somewhere like the UK to fulfill those dreams of making games, and how you do you deal with the balance between your legal skills and your desire to make games? So it's kind of two things there, really. It's like advice for coming over. Secondly, balancing your legal versus your game making, your legal skills and game making desires.
Well, firstly, if you're thinking of actually immigrating, even from South Africa to anywhere in the world, one thing I would really advise is you do not leave without having a job lined up. Either you stick with
Yeah.
your current job, even though it's crappy because of the currency exchange rate. I did not do that, and I I would say I regret it, but actually I don't think the company would have kept me on because of how they were building things. I was a producer slash scrum master for a company that was trying to build a AAA gaming studio in Africa.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were on very strict deadlines, strict budget. I think the company was going through a corporate restructuring at the time, and the worst
2023.
2023. And I think when at the time we were all working fully remote, and then they suddenly were like, okay, you now need to start coming into the office every single day. And this was literally about 5 months before my husband and I were like, we should look at immigrating, because most of the
Yeah.
developers I was working with, they were all based in Poland, the UK,
Yeah.
Brazil, and Spain and Portugal. So I was
Yeah.
just like, well, if they're all working fully remote for this company, we could think about going overseas as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get into too much of the specifics because there was a lot of like politics involved in why I left the company. But we didn't leave on good terms, which
These
is
things happen.
yeah, it happens. Like in hindsight, if I still wanted to go back and work in the gaming industry, it's a very tiny pond. We all know everyone kind
Yeah.
of thing, so it'd be very awkward. But yeah, so
Best not to burn bridges if you can avoid it at the end of the
yeah,
day.
don't burn bridges if you're coming over, because you never know, you could end up needing to go back. But try and have a job lined up on the other side, or at least have a stable job going over to the other side, and kind of look at why you are immigrating in the first place. So for my family specifically, my husband's, he was a tour guide, wanderlust. He's always loved the idea of travel. He's always wanted to travel the world.
Yeah.
I've only got a bit of a taste of travel before I started law school, and I've always wanted to rekindle that. And with a South African passport, it's extremely limited. So we're specifically in the UK to actually be here for like 5-6 years to get our UK nationalization and the UK passport. Even though I'm half Greek, I'm still so like, it's either the British passport or the Greek passport, like, or the
Yeah.
South African passport. But
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get the extra passport to be able to travel, and that was the reason why we also came over here, for like as a family. That was our decision. For my own personal goals, I've always dreamed of competing as a show jumper on the international circuit. Those goals are not exactly coming to fruition because you need money. So that is on the back burner, because also we're moving so much all over the UK. I think we've seen more of the UK than the average citizen in this country. So having a horse would be the worst thing for the poor creature.
Oh
So
yes.
Yeah, we've put that on the.
It's not cheap having horses in the ear. But so back to so just to sum up, so the kind of the kind of finding is try to make sure you've got a job in the location you're going
Yeah,
to. But it's that thing about legal versus, because obviously it's a different legal framework over here.
yeah,
You've got to, how do you deal with the fact that you're operating in a different legal framework? I mean, obviously, most of the stuff we do in the game industry is global, it's international or anyway. So I imagine that it's not quite as much of a challenge as it might be if you were doing solicitor type stuff. But how do you do that? What is the thing that how do you keep balance between wanting to make games versus keeping your kind of legal skills fresh?
yeah. It's very hard with the squirrel brain ADHD. I will say that because it's always the problem when you're creative. You just want to keep creating,
Yeah,
and I think a lot of entrepreneurs with ADHD have that problem. But first, to answer the first question, how I'm able to work in the legal industry here is, even though I've qualified as an attorney in South Africa, South Africa has a legal system based on the UK's common law, and then also
yes,
from the Dutch, from the Netherlands.
yeah,
So a lot of the legal education that I've had is based on common law anyway. So it's a lot
yeah,
easier for me to understand. Um, I I can't do a lot of things that solicitors do. For example, the only thing that I cannot do is I cannot litigate. So if I
no,
have a
exactly.
gaming client come to me, I can't litigate on their behalf. I have to find them a solicitor. There's a lot of areas that I don't know, like gambling, for example, not
Yeah,
my forte. So I go find a specialist to help me with
Gambling
them.
Act 2006, worth checking out.
Yeah. So I actually am dealing with a client right now he came to me and he's like, I have a video game company. Um, one of the developers for Minecraft. The Minecraft store, he creates like really cool skins, but
Yep,
he wants to build a video game company specifically for the gambling industry. And that's when I was just like, okay, well, I'm limited. I'm gonna have to find you a solicitor.
yeah.
So I'm working with my client and the solicitor to try and help him build his
And
gambling
like
gaming
I say,
studio.
so you're basically finding ways of framing people's needs and then understanding when they need specialist help. And I think so. For me, what I find fascinating about this is that it shows that whatever your background, whatever your aims are, understanding the skill set that you've already got and how you can deliver that in the territory you're going to. And at the end of the day, you're tapping into the heart of your desire, the things that you care about most, that desire to want to make games or be involved in the
Yeah.
making of games. And as someone who kind of I feel the same way. I've been wanting to make games forever. I started out wanting to make board games and realized I couldn't make a living in that. I decided to do marketing as a way of earning an income, but what I learned from marketing allowed me to become a better game designer. What I learned by understanding audiences, by
Mm.
understanding pricing strategy, made me a commercial game designer. And I think from a legal point of view, sounds like from your experience, there's so many different constraints and issues, and also cultural contexts which
Yeah.
allow you to understand the parameters, the constraints that you're exposed to, and how we apply that in the way that you can then be creative and create game experiences and importantly communicate important human messages. I
Yeah.
think that's fascinating. But we're out of time. So on that note, Al, tell us a little bit. Tell us a bit. Well, if people want to find out more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Myska Hattersley. They can send me an invite, send me a DM, anything that you need, whether it's contracts to be drafted or you are starting a video game company. You can find me on LinkedIn. I can help advise you, get you started. If you have a website, help you get GDPR, data protection compliant, which a lot of people don't seem to be doing right now. So, and then yeah, if you have any like questions, we also help with the marketing, funding, the game production of of any of the projects that you're starting, then my team with Stuart, Tom, Jay, myself, we're trying to build something to help indies, because a lot of these law firms out there are for big, medium corporations, but there's no one out there for the little guys. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. Trying, for me, myself, how I'm different than every other gaming lawyer out there is every gaming lawyer only has legal education. No one has hands-on experience in a video game studio doing things other than law. And that's where I bring my differences in. So
Sounds good.
yeah, find me
Great
on
stuff.
LinkedIn.
And so, but this has been your Game Dev local podcast. Please, feel free to share, like, talk, comment. Don't forget, we've got an amazing Discord full of amazing people who, like you, are interested in making games and who want to share their stories and engagement in the industry as a whole. We'll be back again with more podcasts, more conversations, and I'll be back on my podquest to learn everything you want to know about game dev. If you want to find more about me, I am at Athanasius on Blue Sky and various other places, and basically you can Google me. So thank you very much. Until next time, this has been your Game Dev Local podcast.